Thank you, first of all, for inviting me. It's quite an honor to be here for your 125th anniversary. I have to make an apology to begin with, even though my wife and I have been coming now to the Netherlands almost every year for 8 years. I still speak no Dutch. I do know one word. Hi. So I just learned that today. But it's a wonderful thing to be here, to be able to celebrate a long history, and to be able to celebrate it in the space that was occupied by the Theosophical Society for so many years is very special. From time to time, just because of the fact that I am the international president, when there is a 100th anniversary of something, I'm there. But I have to say, 125 anniversary, this is the first one that I'm attending. So there's a lot to be said for living long. One of the things in Tibetan Buddhist practice, they frequently have ceremonies for long life, for longevity. Specific ceremonies to help promote a long life. But they don't do it just so that we can stay around taking up space on the earth and not necessarily doing anything. The whole point of their approach is that to those who have found this kind of spiritual path important, it's a long-range project that we are committing to. In the theosophical way of thinking, we think in terms of reincarnation. We think in terms of large, huge periods of time where whole planets, universes come into being, dissolve, come into being again. So for us as humans, and for the organizations, such as the Theosophical Society, which have value to us, long life can be a very good thing. It's not necessarily a good thing, but it really depends on what it is that you are contributing to the place where you are. In your case, to The Hague. Over 125 years, there has been a location to which people can be attracted. People who feel as if there's something more to life than just earning a living, feeding myself and my family. If there's more to that, where do you look for something like that? Very often people try to turn in various directions. All of us, we look to politics, we look to government to try and fulfill some of those needs. People look to the world of science to try and describe this universe that we live in, but always we end up with more questions than we have answers. And in that process, eventually, many people come to the point of view that this process of exploration is something that requires my participation. It's not going to happen for me through any other means. And so that's when something like the Theosophical Society in The Hague becomes a point of attraction and a point of interest. The fact that it has been so for 125 years says that for a long time, you've been doing something right. So my hope, of course, is that even though probably it won't be me, I would be more accurate if I said I'm very sure it won't be me attending your 250th anniversary of The Hague. I certainly hope it's not me. I will have been around way too long if that happens. So, wanted to just talk a little bit today, just to share some thoughts, some ideas. Perhaps it might be something that strikes a chord with you. Hopefully it will be. But at the least, for us to try and think together about a couple of things. Specifically, wanted to talk about your theme, translated, the eternal wisdom for present times, or something like that. So the eternal wisdom for present times. When I speak about it, when I'm talking about theosophy or the eternal wisdom, the term that seems to me most attractive, and the term I find myself using the most, is the ageless wisdom. Not the ancient wisdom, because ancient talks about something that's rooted in time, something that has been here, has had its day of growth, and that we look back to, as we do with so many things, looking back to the good old days, when there was this golden age of ancient wisdom. I prefer ageless, because if, in fact, the advices and the teachings that have come down to us through people like Buddha, through the Bhagavad Gita, through Jesus, if those teachings are true, then it's something that is not bound in time. It's as true 30,000 years ago as it was 2,000 years ago as it is now. And so that's the way I choose to point my attention. So in speaking about perhaps a more limited subject, how do we respond to the issues of today in the light of the ageless wisdom? And there's a bunch of things in there. You know, that seems like a pretty simple question, but of course it's not. And being a theosophist, no question is ever simple. You know, it's got to have 7 layers at least. So, you know, how to respond. And I very much like the idea of speaking in terms of responsiveness rather than speaking in terms of reaction. Reaction is when somebody slaps you and without even thinking about it, you hit them. That's a reaction, animal style reaction. But when we are charged to respond, it's something that demands much more from us. It demands a certain amount of thought. It demands a certain amount of quiet in order to fully see what it is that's in front of us. There's an ancient prayer from India that says, "May I see what I see. May I hear what I hear." And it almost sounds silly, because if I see it, of course I see it. But no, because for each of us, you know, we look out over this gathering, and to each of us, what we see, which is very clear, is that I'm here, you're there. Clearly, what we see is based in some degree of separateness, of individual identity. All of these things that we have come to regard as the real world. So we learn to respond based on certain things. So when we talk about the issues of today, there are a lot of them. We pick and choose which ones we want to direct the attention based on the ageless wisdom, but the issues that we can choose from are many. Certainly, one of the things that has become clear in very recent years is the shared nature of our global experience. You know, pandemic, if the pandemic did not bring the point home that we are completely interconnected, well then probably we needed stronger medicine than a pandemic to open our eyes and see what we see. You know, here, a virus, something none of us can even see with our eyes, arises. It arises in one place, folks in another place experience it. Because it arises, the workforces in places around the world become diminished, not because the people disappeared, but because their attention to a previous pattern of activity changed. So the idea of interconnection is certainly obvious, but what might be issues today related that the ageless wisdom might have some bearing on? Certainly the age-old human issue of violence and war is something that's in front of us full-time right now. Just a couple of days ago, my wife and I went on a little journey through the central part of the Netherlands, and we rented a car. And probably when we came back, we had used maybe 12, 15 liters of petrol. And, you know, the shock was that, 40 euros for 1/4 of a tank of petrol. And the basis for that is our interconnection to things going on in a part of the world we don't see, but we definitely experience. So this might be an issue. Any place you go in the world today, nobody is so blind that they do not recognize that there is something we can call a change in the climate. I mean, even the ones who want to deny that, for whatever their reasons are, have to work so hard now in order for that to be a position that they can promote, because it's very clear. I'm so happy that you're air conditioned here because I brought this jacket specifically to wear in front of you. And had you not have air conditioning, I'd be up here in my shirt, looking undignified for the president of the Theosophical Society. So thank you for that. But the temperature is rising. I was in Tibet not too very long ago. You can tell because I have white hair, I say not too very long ago, and it was a decade ago. But at that time, one of the things they wanted to do was to take us to these sacred lakes. The water from the glaciers melted into the lake, and this is one of the places where the future Dalai Lama would go for visions. When we got to the lake, there was no glacier anymore. What had been in existence and part of their sacred cultural approach and spiritual approach ceased to exist. They pointed to where it used to be, but there was just a dry channel running down from there. Climate change is one of the issues of today. And then, of course, you have the continual issue of the various isms that we impose on each other. Caste-ism, race-ism, all of the things related to poverty and the stratification of that. That's continually with us. And particularly today, it seems, there is a global, you could call it another epidemic, of depression, isolation, a sense of aloneness, a sense of not belonging, that somehow has found its way throughout populations all around the world. These are issues that demand some level of response, but don't respond somehow to traditional solutions. There is this expression, and most of the time Albert Einstein is given credit for it, that no problem can be solved on the same level of consciousness at which that problem was created. You can't solve a problem based on the knowledge that created that same problem. And, just for your own benefit and mine as well, the issues that I have pointed to about war, about climate change, about economic imbalance, poverty, even depression and isolation. If we are looking for solutions to any one of them, all of them, if knowledge was what we needed, more or different knowledge, there is no need for anything more than the level of knowledge that humanity possesses right now to address climate change. Nobody needs a new degree in a different subject to be able to talk about the ineffectiveness of war as a political policy, as any policy. It doesn't work. For thousands of years, it has been attempted, and in no case do you ever find that the mothers of the children who are killed in these fighting find themselves at peace with the ones who engaged in that fighting. It doesn't work. What World War I, the slogan in America for why we should go to war, was because this was going to be the war to end all wars. That's 1914. How did that work out? We know. So, but solutions exist in the realm of knowledge. What should become clear is that if solving these various issues which we face today is dependent upon knowledge, well then maybe that's not the way. Maybe there is some other component that is required that has to be brought to bear, something else that is not at the same level at which this problem was created, that must be brought to bear on this variety of human-induced issues. Just to give you my particular point of view. We talk about knowledge, but knowledge, in a sense, is built from information. And so information is completely neutral. It's just the facts. Beige carpet, white ceilings, that's information. As that information starts to take on a broader structure, then we start to call it knowledge. We start to know how to make white paint. We start to know how to weave the carpets. There's a knowledge base involved in that. But then there's this other term. And this is the whole point of something like a Theosophical Society, or the point of anything that could be described as a spiritual path. And that's when we start to feel that there is this something that can be called wisdom. And from time to time in the world, it seems as if people appear that in their life exhibit something which we point to and we say, they're wise. And we all recognize that wisdom and the behavior that is exhibited by wise people is not taking place within the boundaries of this limited field of knowledge. So, how do we become wise is the question that any spiritually directed endeavor tries to point to. And often it begins with, very basic question of who am I? That's the one that, Ramana Maharshi focused on so intensively. And everybody asks that question. And, some people, for some of us, the answers that we come back with, we say, well, it's a difficult question, so maybe let me just settle for what I can say I know. I know I'm Dutch. or I know I'm an American. You know, all of those different things. We settled for that because it's too hard to go deeper. But again, if the wise people who have periodically appeared in the world are correct, then there is the potential for each one of us to connect with and to exhibit this perception of reality. May I see what I see. This perception of reality that is wisdom. It's a possibility. So, the issues of today. We've said a little bit about that. But then how do we deal with these issues, specifically in the light of the eternal or ageless wisdom? So rather than jump right to that, I think there's a little ground we need to cover before we get there. We say the eternal wisdom, we say the ageless wisdom. We understand what those two words mean, ageless wisdom. But what really does that tell us about what is this ageless wisdom? They're good words, and you get the feeling that they kind of point in that direction, but it doesn't do a lot for me, just the label. You know, what is the ageless wisdom? In the founding of the Theosophical Society, which occurred, at the end of the 19th century, Theosophy was described as this ageless wisdom. And it was an ageless wisdom present around the world in every culture and every society throughout time, but it was being neglected, being covered over. And so, the particular roots for the Hague Lodge date back to just 25 years after the founding of the Theosophical Society. Not even that long. 21, 22 years after the Theosophical Society was founded, here in the Netherlands, here in Hague, people responded to this new impulse or a renewed presentation of a very old impulse that came to be known as Theosophy, but was known as the ageless wisdom. So what is it about this ageless wisdom that was, what are the main features of that? And, we could list things, karma, reincarnation, but at least to my mind, I'll share with you my view. I, like probably everybody else who first became acquainted with this avenue of study and understanding, went to the books. And, you find yourself reading, trying to understand the concepts, the language used to describe it. If we stay with that long enough, there should come a point for us where we can describe for ourselves and from ourselves what is this ageless wisdom. So I don't necessarily have to revert to the book that was written by that great person who died more than 100 years ago. If it's current, if it's real, if it's something that has become internalized, then maybe there's something I can say about it. I may not be the great authority, but certainly everybody has something to share from their own experience, if it's touched them at all. Anyway, for me, as most of you who are affiliated with the Theosophical way of thinking are familiar, the number 7 is very important. 7 planes of being, 7 different evolutionary presentations of humankind in different places. 7, 7, 7. It's a good thing. For me, even though I'm international president, I could only come up with 5. So I'm sure the 6th and the 7th are there, but let me share my limited view of what this ageless wisdom, this theosophy presentation came in the world to try to communicate. And probably the first thing would be this idea that there are a number of ways we could put it. You could say that we live in an intelligent universe, which is to say there is no empty space. There is no place that is not charged with intelligence and its expression, mostly at levels we don't perceive. But there is an intelligent organization to this universe. Again, nowadays every one of us carry a cell phone around in our pockets. My brother is one who can't stand change. And for years, he teaches in school, and for years he would walk around with this thing, and his students would joke with him, Mr. Boyd, where did you find that brick? Or, they would say, Mr. Boyd, where's the string tied from that one to the other phone you're talking to? He doesn't like change, but he even uses a smartphone these days. But any one of us who have a smartphone are completely aware that from the other side of the earth, if someone were to dial you, your phone would ring in this room. Because this room, your bodies, the space we're living in, is filled with the wavelengths that are suitable, not just to that, but it's filled with X-rays, gamma rays, all sorts of activity that is completely ordered is the nature of the universe within which we live. From the ageless wisdom point of view, that sort of intelligence also takes on certain embodiments in spheres that are oftentimes inaccessible to us. But the whole idea of angelic presences, or the idea of the fairies and things like that, are an expression of universal intelligence and no empty space. So that's one thing of my 5. The second one would be that we live in a multi-dimensional universe. And it doesn't take a lot of thought for us to recognize that even to whatever the limitations of our vision may be, if I stick a pin in my hand, there's a bodily sensation. If someone gives me some news that is disappointing, there is an emotional component, another level. As I sit to consider the news, to consider the pin, I go into the realm of thought. So minimally, everybody is aware of bodily sensations, emotions, and thought, none of which are visible, but which we accept as part of our limited band of reality. But this is a multi-dimensional universe, and those dimensions extend, we could say, limitlessly, but quite far beyond anything that we're able to perceive. So multi-dimensionality is a second thing. A third thing would be what to me is very clear, that for each one of us, in order to unfold, in order to understand, there is a certain self-responsibility. There's an expression that was in one of the little early writings of the Theosophical Society. It's called The Idol of the White Lotus, but it's a nice little story. But inside of that, there are these things called the 3 truths, one of which states that each person is their own ultimate lawgiver, the decreer of your happiness and your sadness. Basically, each one of us stands in the position of, either through our responsible choices or through our lack of responsible choices, which is also a choice, that we dictate. We are responsible for our own condition of mind. We are responsible for our inability to express, to feel happiness. We are responsible for our inability or for our hesitation to connect with others. That's a choice that we make, and often we make it just based on fear or the other things that come through our mind. But self-responsibility is a very important aspect of anything that claims to be spiritual in nature. The fourth idea is that we are on an evolutionary journey. And the evolution is not just the change in the forms of the body, but there's an evolution of consciousness. Evolution, just the root meaning of the word, it means unfoldment. So it's very clear. The idea is, it's much like if you had a picture of something in your pocket, folded up into a bunch of little, and bit by bit, you unfold that image, and it reveals more and more and more of the nature of that thing. So this unfoldment process is what we're engaged in. But the most important part from the perspective of the ageless wisdom is the unfoldment of consciousness. That there, in fact, are no limits to our capacity to see and to understand. So that's something we follow along with. And so, saving maybe not the best for last, but the most important of these points is simply this, that this ageless wisdom, all of the other points have their importance. But the most important point is what might be described as the fact of oneness, of unity, of inseparability, of the word that was used in the founding days of the Theosophical Society, brotherhood, in the sense of we are knitted together. We rise together, we fall together, whether it's across the seas or right here where we are. Unity is the most important focus of them all. So, in terms of the issues that we face today, out of this wisdom background, it's not something that necessarily recommends a formula. And that's always been the problem of this sort of approach to unfoldment. That it's not something that specifies specific case-by-case formulas for behavior. But what it does seem to say is this, that the root cause of every one of the problems we have spoken about, the issues we have spoken about, the root cause is in this completely, an understanding that we have just completely internalized, that in every phase we are separated. It has been called the heresy, the completely false teaching of separateness is at the root of these things. So how do I address, I'm living in the US, in Chicago, when we're not in India. A war breaks out in a part of the world. What's the formula for my behavior in response to this, or to the starvation, or the displacement, or the various other things that occur as a collateral reaction to this violence? From Chicago, if any of us had it in our power, of course, we would wave a finger, give a command, and all of this would stop. We don't have that power. Maybe you do, but I don't, that's for sure. But what I do have the power to do is this. In my own family, in the circle of people that I interact with, what is it that communicates itself most powerfully? Generally, it's not our ideas. You know, it's who you are. Speaks louder. It speaks so loud people can't even hear what you're saying. How it is that you interact with others. Whether or not there is this condition of your being that often is described as a loving nature. It doesn't mean you're throwing your arms around people and hugging everyone who comes in. I know people who do that. McKeel even knows people who do that. But it's something that your heart, your intention is to contribute to other people's happiness, to diminish other people's suffering. And then you figure out ways. Once that becomes something you can set as your intention, then the specific cases all respond to that at some level. As president of the Theosophical Society, we have groups of the Theosophical Society in the Ukraine. We have groups of the Theosophical Society in Russia. And you look at it, and on both sides, none of them are carrying a gun. None of them are pushing a button to do any of that. All of them are affected. And so it benefits no one. But out of this has also come the recognition among many members in the Russian section that across the border, these are and have always been our brothers and sisters in this. What can I do? I can't stop this fighting immediately, but I can link with them. I can help them in terms of the people and the needs that they might have. And that's something that grows. But the ability to see what we see is one of the things that comes out of this even brief interaction with this ageless wisdom. The deeper we can recognize our own unity, the fact of interdependence, of non-separation, that becomes a power. And it's a power that others feel and respond to. And just like throwing a rock into a pond, the rock hits the water, the ripples go out. You don't see how far they go. At a certain point, it seems like they've disappeared. But they go on. So that's probably what I have to share. Again, I am very, very appreciative that I was invited to be here. I will be able to tell others around the world that I have stood in this place, and even more that I spoke in this place to members throughout the Dutch section, the Netherlands section. Something I'm very happy for. So thank you all.